Hi, I'm Dave Caro with BlazeMeter. Companies who have long trusted LoadRunner and Performance Center are adopting new solutions for performance testing based on open source tools. These leaders are achieving significantly higher performance test coverage by shifting testing to the left and democratizing access. I'll take you behind the scenes explaining why this transition is happening and how you can increase the odds of success in your own environment. Here's what to expect. First, we'll see how legacy tools created the Center of Excellence bottleneck. Then we'll see why the core concepts of Agile and DevOps revolve around eliminating handoffs and bottlenecks. That will set us up to see why open source tools emerged as the go-to solution for the COE bottleneck. In the fourth section, we'll talk about the new emerging role for the Center of Excellence. The Center of Excellence doesn't need to go away. It just needs to be flipped inside out. Instead of maintaining a queue and performing all the work, it can be the provider of a framework where many people can do work for themselves. Lastly, we'll talk about how to get started on your own shift left without reinventing the wheel. My first point is that legacy tools created the Center of Excellence bottleneck. Let's see why. First of all, legacy performance testing tools were complex. They were complex to set up, complex to use. Because of that, you needed highly trained specialists. Secondly, restrictive licensing. Licensing is not just a code word for expensive. Yes, it was expensive, but actually, more importantly, the licensing was restrictive. For example, licenses were node locked. If you didn't know, a controller literally had a license that was node locked to that physical controller box. If you wanted to use that controller for more than one project, you had to put that controller on a dolly and wheel it down to another lab in order to use the test there as well. That's pretty restrictive. Between the complexity and the restricted licensing, it just made sense to centralize this function. So the Center of Excellence was born. During the waterfall era, a trip to the Center of Excellence, or the COE, was something you could plan for and schedule. That plan included dedicated lab time and cycles to transfer knowledge from the team building an application to the COE team, which would in turn create tests and execute them, perform analysis, and report back. With a small number of practitioners and a scarcity of infrastructure, naturally there was a queue. The larger the organization, the larger the queue. We've seen firms with very large budgets that had a 60-day queue for performance testing. You wouldn't want to walk into a store and see that your number was 982 and that they were now serving number 27. And it's no fun to wait in a queue for 2 weeks or 2 months for a test that you need now. So performance testing became synonymous with large investments, expensive resources, and long lead times. To the newly forming Agile teams that wanted performance feedback early and often, that also meant unacceptable handoffs and bottlenecks that they needed to avoid somehow. So before we talk about why open source took off amidst the Agile teams, let's briefly look at why eliminating bottlenecks and handoffs is so central to Agile. Let's start by looking at the 3 core principles of DevOps according to my dog-eared copy of the DevOps Handbook by Gene Kim, Jez Humble, Patrick Dubois, and John Willis. This book does a great job consolidating a lot of real-world learnings from the DevOps movement. The first principle is flow. By focusing on small batch sizes and eliminating constraints, you aim for a situation where stuff moves through quickly and doesn't spend very much time in any one place. Your goal is to get stuff out into the real world early and often. The second is feedback. The reason you want to ship small batches is to get feedback early and often. Then, as defects are found, you swarm the team to resolve them quickly. You don't end up with 6 months of work and 3 months of backlog of chewing away at the bugs. Instead, you have a team that's always building small incremental changes and cranking stuff out. When they find a problem, they fix it quickly. The third core principle is continuous experimentation. You want to make it safe to play with stuff, to change things, and to try it out and see what happens. When you learn something, that knowledge is quickly shared throughout the rest of your organization. Local discoveries shared globally. The authors sum it up nicely. The idea is to deliver business intent fast without heroics. So how do you achieve flow in Agile? If you boil it down to the essential, there's just 2 things. 1, you divide up the work in multiple small teams working in parallel. You don't have a giant organization all working on one feature at the same time. You break it up into feature teams and they merge their work often. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, these teams are designed to be self-contained, so they can work autonomously without waiting on others. Less friction means more flow. Teams can move at their own speed, limited only by their own capacity. So why did open source performance testing take off as Agile and DevOps did? Because it's self-service, pain-driven, and a zero-friction model. People wanted to get something done. They didn't want to open a ticket and wait. Instead, they just Googled it, downloaded something, and got started. They could learn on YouTube, and then fire up some cloud resources, and they were off to the races. Very, very low friction. And then there's the open market of shared knowledge, plugins, design patterns that they could very easily adopt. Again, you just Google it. You don't Google it and decide you can raise a PO to go buy this thing. You Google it and start using it. The entry point is extremely low friction. Think about it. If performance engineering is synonymous with the center of excellence and these large investments in people and licenses, then asking your boss to go out and buy something else is probably not the first thing you want to be doing. People just went and got open source tools and started using them. They were working around the center of excellence. But some things don't come for free with open source. There's a gap. It came with some pretty significant gaps, actually. How do you tell JMeter to go leap up onto the cloud and bring up 100 machines and run a test? You have to figure that out with a lot of scripting and a lot of your own cobbling together. How do you get reporting in real time? Actually, from JMeter, you don't. It doesn't do that. Collaboration. How do you share those results easily? You have to build some repository that you somehow move the results into, that you somehow publish. Test management. How do you watch tests over time? How do you make sure that you can get back to previous results? Then there's support. How do you get support for the open source tools? How do you learn new tricks? You can Google it, but if you're on a tight schedule or you're trying to do something that you can't seem to find much support for out in the real world, where do you go for support? There are some things missing in open source. These gaps have actually created an opportunity for a new role for the center of excellence. Who do people go to when they need performance testing or performance engineering typically? The COE. In this new world, the COE can be the one that makes these gaps go away. What if the COE could actually be the facilitator of democratized testing? That's where we get to the COE 2.0, facilitating shift left and democratization. Another way to look at this is we're talking about transforming the COE from a center of excellence to a center of enablement. This is where it starts to get really interesting. I'm going to share just 3 attributes of COE 2.0 transformations we've observed that succeed in shifting testing to the left earlier in the software development lifecycle and democratizing the access so that the performance feedback is quick and accessible, laying a foundation for continuous performance testing and a massive rise in test coverage. The first attribute is self-service everything. You want to get out of the business of managing a queue and instead hand out logins, API keys, and automation interfaces. Let the teams run and do what they do. I group self-service into 2 key areas. Make it easy to get started and make it easy to automate and integrate. Before we imagine what does that really look like and what do I do and is this a framework and is this a bunch of libraries, there's really just 2 simple things you need to address. One is you need a web UI for fast onboarding. People need to be able to go to an address and get everything they need to get started. They need some place to go to be able to do ad hoc testing that is not automated yet. You want to automate, but before you automate, you need to be able to just do stuff. A web interface lets you do that. Get reporting instantly and collaborate and share results instantly. The other thing you need, owing to this whole shift left and the desire to automate and have developers be at the center of this, is open APIs and command line interfaces, CLIs, for fast automation. Integration without needing a plugin. Plugins are great. A Jenkins plugin is cool, it does something, but typically it does a finite thing that's already been thought out. The example in the performance testing space would be, I've got a test that I built, it's somewhere stored already, and I want to wake up that server and tell it to run that test. If that test already exists somewhere, then that helps. But if, for instance, you said, well, I've just seen a check-in of 4 modules of code, and I want to find the right test for those 4 modules, and I want to assemble them into a single unit of test and launch the test, a plugin is generally not going to help you with that. You need more flexibility, and that's why open APIs and command line interfaces are a great way to, again, unleash the small autonomous teams and get out of their way. The second concept, and this is one of those things I'm amazed when we talk to people about how things work, they don't necessarily discover this right away, but when you talk about it, it's sort of a no-brainer, which is to parallelize everything. An entire test takes only as long as its single largest component. Typically, you have a bunch of tests, they run sequentially. People would line up a whole bunch of tests and they're going to run through their suite of tests. That means that you have a long running test window. But if you could compress the test cycles down to minutes by running things in parallel, you end up with a situation that's more scalable. You can grow the test coverage without lengthening the cycle. If you're trying to increase your maturity, you're trying to increase from, say, 50% coverage to 70% coverage or whatever, the last thing you want to do is have it take longer to get feedback. That's an essential part of the process. By going in parallel and running your tests at the same time, you eliminate that. The best queue is a queue with just one test in it. By that I mean that at the very moment you decide that a test should be run, it should start running. It should just start running. You don't queue it up and run it tonight. You don't queue it to run the next time you get a testing window. And as soon as it's in the queue, it's actually executing. Finally, provide an execution platform that amplifies rather than constrains the use of open source tools. This gets back to those gaps. Fill them and you get open source community innovation and enterprise class support. You want to get scalability and reporting and collaboration and integration, but you don't want to make people change the tests they've already built. If somebody's already Googled it, set up an open source tool, built some tests and been running them locally and now wants help sharing it or scaling it bigger, you don't want to tell that person, oh, okay, I just need you to refactor a few things. If you could move this over here, or if you could convert this into that, then it will work on my platform that I've gotten for you. That sort of blows the whole idea of enabling these people to self-serve, getting out of their way and letting them get things done. You get the benefit of open source innovation and you don't want to put any barriers in the way of them being able to do that. If you embrace this new reality, you get it. Shifting left is great. Instead of having a 10 times bigger center of excellence, have a small center of excellence that enables 10 times as many people to do testing, or 100 times as many. That's great. As you embrace this new reality, you face the decision. Should I dedicate resource to build my own pipeline tools or focus on what flows through the pipeline instead? At BlazeMeter, we have really a mix. There's two kinds of customers that come to us. One is a customer who comes to us because they don't want to build their own. The other kind of customer is somebody who actually has already gone and built their own. They, of course, came to us because it's hard, it takes a while, it's a minimally viable product, and it needs maintenance. And they realize, hey, do you want to be working on the pipeline or do you want to be working on pushing stuff through the pipeline? It really comes down to where you're going to put your resources. Here's why you don't need to reinvent the wheel. At BlazeMeter, we've already built a platform that facilitates self-service, lets you run tests in parallel, and amplifies open source tools. Democratization means supporting wider adoption beyond the traditional performance testing center of excellence. So testing can shift left and shift right, where any team can perform performance testing as needed, and testing can match the cadence of continuous delivery. BlazeMeter is a SaaS and on-premise performance testing platform designed to help DevOps and Agile teams begin mobile, web, microservices, and API testing early in the SDLC, and reuse these tests all the way through to production. Here's a little bit more about BlazeMeter. It's pure SaaS. You just point a browser at blazemeter.com to get started. We're focused on 100% open source compatibility. We take this really seriously, something we call load and go. The idea is that if you have an open source test that works on your desktop or in any environment already, you should just be able to load it into our system and go. You shouldn't have to rewrite it. You shouldn't have to refactor it. You shouldn't have to move things around. You should just be able to load and go. We started with JMeter and we've moved on to 9 different tools that we support. So we take open source compatibility very seriously. While we are a SaaS solution, we support testing from public clouds, virtual private clouds, and behind the firewall. Our architecture lets us scale your tests to millions of virtual users. You end up with one system you can use from local testing at a developer's desktop all the way to the largest outside-in infrastructure readiness testing. Finally, we have a test orchestration tool called Taurus that exposes a domain-specific language and command line interface to automate testing from any development environment, continuous integration, or release automation server. We've also built the entire web solution API first, meaning anything you can do with the web UI, you can automate with REST calls. So with BlazeMeter, we provide a way to leverage the flexibility and openness of open source with the enterprise-grade features you need to scale up, collaborate, and get support as needed. Those last two sides are a lot of detail. Let's step back and take a simpler view of how our BlazeMeter came to be and what we're really up to here. This graph shows interest in the DevOps keyword in Google over time. BlazeMeter was born with the DevOps movement, grew with it, and importantly, has only ever existed within it. We've always had a clear vision of democratization, speed, and automation. Other solutions may talk about shifting left or being agile or DevOps friendly, but we literally have it in our DNA, not just our latest marketing campaigns. We care about this democratization of performance engineering movement to our core, and we take contributing to its success and yours very seriously. At BlazeMeter, we like to share, we like to support open source community, and we like to make it very easy to get started. Just point your browser at blazemeter.com and click the Start Testing Now button. We'll ask you just for your name and email, and then we'll take you straight into the app. If you have questions or would like a demo, just ask. We look forward to helping you succeed in the modern software delivery world.